Welcome, YBA Joes, to Run That Back, the show where we take two runs of a similar time and we see what made the difference in the end. These two runs we're going to be comparing today have an interesting backstory, as when the All Bosses category was first made, the first run by Hamman wasn't exactly the most optimized, as there were a lot of big mistakes and oversights that were never brought up. After everything you'll see today, he did eventually improve it into a 712, but that's not what we're talking about today. When this was the only run on the board, a Brazilian YBA YouTuber called Tonnak decided to give it a try after figuring out a lot of places where he could save time. But this would eventually lead to one of his viewers, Bora Bora, to switch stands entirely from Whitesnake to GER, where even though it doesn't have any M1 links, its raw damage and effectiveness on the last two fights elevated it up the board. However, this pattern would then repeat, not in Brazil, but in Russia, as a Russian YBA YouTuber called Mills Dark decided to give it a shot for himself, and by a hair got the first sub-7 time in the category's history. But this also led to one of his viewers, Inflin, to give a crack at the time itself, and that neatly segues us into the comparison.
Into the heat of battle. Go for it!
They're both exactly even heading towards Bucciarati. Miles does his hammer-on charge earlier and so starts him slightly ahead of Inflin. However, Miles Dark accidentally misreads Bucciarati's AI and is forced to eat a full barrage while his is on cooldown. But to make up for it, Miles gets good RNG heading into Fugo, something that Inflin isn't able to get. But to even it out, Miles accidentally activates the backdash glitch, which causes both him and Inflin to get a little bit closer. Again, Inflin does the boss faster, but the RNG that Miles got is boosting him forward just that little bit. Upcoming is the toughest part of the run, as because both Pesci and Ghiaccio's leash ranges interconnect with each other, you have to fight both of them at the same time. However, both runners decide to not take this approach, as it's way too risky to do with a stand like GER. Miles exits Pesci faster, but the distance is getting closer and closer. And heading into Ghiaccio, they both started at exactly the same time. Miles gets the faster kill, but Inflin is quicker with the reset, which evens it out a little bit more. Miles does a really interesting move here and activates his awakening early so he can do a little bit more damage to Diavolo and overall get further away from any times that could potentially be closer. However, this does run the risk of having the awakening on cooldown when he absolutely needs it for the last two fights. Thanks to the extra damage from the awakening, Miles now has a 3-second gap on Inflin. Miles gets a really fast kill on Dio, but unfortunately Inflin has bad RNG and has Dio activate time stop early, which means he has to use return to zero to counter it. If Jotaro does the same thing, then he won't have return to zero ready, and that's a massive time loss. On top of that, neither of the two runners got good RNG, where it really could have elevated one further than the other. The worst thing that could have happened to Inflin ends up happening, as Jotaro is able to get off a time stop while he doesn't have return to zero. But thankfully he's able to do enough damage in the wind-up so that the time stop doesn't end up mattering. Miles Dark doesn't have all the corpse parts on his account, so he uses a friend with Mr. President to get him in, at the cost of a little bit of time. However, this trick is actually illegal if someone does it just before they teleport in, which thankfully the Mr. President didn't end up doing, so this still remains legal. Again, neither of them get good RNG, which would have completely made the difference had one of them got it. After a decently good start, Miles' fight against Jotaro is starting to go really south after a couple really bad strings of RNG and some failed reads. However, for Inflin, he starts to get the opposite outcome, which slowly starts to close the gap. Miles' health is starting to get low as Jotaro reaches his time stop point, so Miles has to play a lot more safe. But with Inflin, he's not exactly concerned with his health because he can see the time right ahead of him. Inflin closes off one of the best Jotaro fights he's had to end running home with a 6:43, netting him a new world record. Miles' time, however, is nothing to scoff at considering it was the first sub-7. Pretty much the only big issue he had in the run was the missed read at Bucciarati and Jotaro, but regardless, Inflin walked away with the faster time.